In the late 1800s, the American economy was a powerhouse of rapid industrialization and wealth, but beneath that progress was a brutal human machinery. At the time, the dominant economic philosophy was laissez-faire. The core idea was simple. If the government stayed out of the way and avoided regulating business, it would spark innovation and lift the standard of living for everyone. But this photograph shows the reality of that unregulated system. Workers spent their days inhaling toxic dust and lint, locked into repetitive tasks around heavy machines that lacked any basic safety mechanisms. Look closely at the bare feet of these young boys, balancing right on the moving gears. There were no workplace safety rules, no training requirements, and no age restrictions to protect the vulnerable. This was the baseline for a common laborer. These coal miners, eating their meal in the dark, were part of a workforce expected to endure 59-hour work weeks for an average of just 22 cents an hour. This chart shows an economic trend that made things even more tense: deflation. Because the value of money was rising, prices were falling sharply. Technically, a worker's buying power was going up, but companies used this environment as an excuse to constantly slash wages. Workers simply felt the squeeze of a shrinking paycheck. An individual worker facing constant pay cuts and dangerous conditions had zero leverage against their employer. If they were treated poorly, their only legal recourse was to quit. To survive, they realized they had to unite. Early craft unions, made up of highly trained machinists and iron olders, had some bargaining power because employers needed their specialized skills. But the moment vast numbers of unskilled, common laborers tried to organize, corporations fought back aggressively. The corporate playbook was ruthless. Management forced employees to sign contracts promising never to join a union. They locked striking workers out of their own factories. And if someone was caught organizing, they were fired and placed on an industry-wide blacklist so no other company would hire them. When those administrative tactics failed, owners hired private armies. Detective agencies like the Pinkertons brought in armed muscle to protect strikebreakers and violently intimidate union members. This is where the hypocrisy of laissez-faire became glaringly obvious. The government, which insisted on staying out of economic affairs when it came to worker safety, suddenly stepped in to help owners break strikes. Part of this state overreaction came from the fear that collective action was inherently un-American. Officials increasingly tied immigrant workers to European Marxism and radical anarchist plots to overthrow the state. Courts began ruling that strikes were illegal conspiracies and restraint of trade. Labor leaders were jailed. What started as local disputes over wages escalated into a fully militarized national war. The first massive explosion happened in July 1877, after the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad announced its third consecutive wage cut. 80,000 railroad workers across the country walked off the job and blocked the tracks. When local police forces couldn't clear the rails, President Hayes declared a state of insurrection and deployed the military. Look at this line of uniformed federal soldiers, rifles in hand, guarding train cars against American citizens. It took 12 days of gun battles to restore order. By the time it ended, over 100 were dead, and $10 million in property was destroyed. The violence only escalated. During the 1886 Haymarket Riot in Chicago, a bomb was thrown during a labor protest, prompting police to open fire into the crowd. The ensuing panic ruined the reputation of the Knights of Labor, one of the few early unions that welcomed minorities. A few years later, the 1892 Homestead strike resulted in a 14-hour gun battle between steelworkers and the Pinkertons. Then came the 1894 Pullman strike, which crippled national railways until a federal court injunction crushed the boycott entirely. Capital and the government had decisively won the labor wars. The massive industrial strikes had failed, and it was clear to organizers that head-on physical conflict against the state was a losing strategy. But the bloodshed didn't kill the labor movement. Instead, it forced workers to adapt. They abandoned the dream of one giant unified uprising and splintered into specialized factions with entirely different strategies. Samuel Gompers, pictured here, took a highly pragmatic, conservative approach by creating the American Federation of Labor, or AFL, in 1886. Gompers survived by being fiercely exclusionary. The AFL focused purely on negotiating wages and 8-hour workdays for skilled white men, while largely ignoring unskilled laborers, minorities, and women. On the other end of the spectrum were the industrial workers of the world, nicknamed the Wobblies. As you can see from this diverse crowd in Union Square, they took the radical route, attempting to organize all laborers into one big union. The movement was now deeply divided. One side fought for the pragmatic survival of a privileged few, while the other pushed for radical, dangerous idealism. Women made up nearly 18% of the workforce and endured the same brutal factory conditions. Look at how crowded these sewing machines are. Yet they were explicitly barred from joining most of the major male-led unions, so female laborers took matters into their own hands. Led by organizers like Mother Jones, women formed their own groups, like the Women's Trade Union League. Here, you can see strikers proudly wearing sashes for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. These female-led unions organized massive strikes to demand a concrete list of protections: the 8-hour workday, a baseline minimum wage, and the absolute end of child labor. The basic rights we enjoy today, weekends, minimum wages, and workplace safety, were not natural byproducts of a booming economy. They were paid for by groups of regular people who refused to surrender to corporate and state violence.